December 15, 1944, German radar operator Heinrich Müller watched his screen in disbelief as American P-51 Mustangs materialized out of thin air, obliterating his squadron before vanishing like ghosts, defying every principle of aerial warfare he'd been taught. What Luftwaffe pilot Klaus Weber discovered in American captivity about these invisible fighters would shatter everything the Nazi regime had told him about American capabilities and change his understanding of power forever. But what was the real secret behind the P-51's seemingly supernatural ability to appear from nowhere, and how did it reveal a truth about America that the German war machine was literally blind to see? December 15, 1944. The cold German morning bit through Klaus Weber's leather flight jacket as he walked across the frozen airfield near Munich. Ice crystals clung to the metal hangar doors. His breath made white clouds in the bitter air. At 23, Klaus had already seen more death than most men twice his age. The war was not going well for Germany. Everyone knew it, even if nobody dared say it out loud. American bombers filled the skies almost every day now. The thunder of their engines shook the ground for miles. German cities burned night after night, but the Nazi radio still promised victory. The newspapers still showed pictures of German soldiers marching forward. Klaus wanted to believe them. His father worked in a factory back home in Bavaria. Before the war, Herr Weber had taught his son about German machines. German cars were the best in the world. German tools never broke. German engineering was perfect. The Americans, his father said, only knew how to make cheap toys and bad coffee. Their soldiers were soft. Their pilots were cowards who only won because they had more planes. Klaus pulled on his flying helmet and climbed into his Bf-19 fighter. The cockpit smelled like oil and metal. The engine coughed twice before starting. There was barely enough fuel for this mission. The mechanics had told him to be careful, make every drop count, come back fast. The radio crackled in his ear. All pilots, enemy bombers approaching from the west, climb to 8,000 meters, intercept and destroy. Klaus pushed the throttle forward. His plane lifted off the runway with a roar. Flying beside him was his wingman, Otto Kraus. Otto was only 19. His face still looked like a boy's face. They had trained together for 6 months. Otto believed everything the Nazi teachers told them. America was weak. Germany would win. The fatherland was strong, but Klaus had started to wonder, where were all the experienced pilots? Why was their fuel running so low? Why did the American bombers keep coming, no matter how many they shot down? The German radar stations had picked up the enemy formation 20 minutes ago, a large group of B-17 bombers with fighter escorts. The radar operators counted at least 40 big planes. Klaus and Otto were part of a group of 12 German fighters sent to stop them. As they climbed higher, Klaus could see smoke rising from Munich in the distance. The Americans had bombed the city again yesterday. His aunt lived there with her 3 children. He had not heard from them in 2 weeks. "Klaus, do you see them yet?" Otto's voice came through the radio. "Not yet," Klaus replied. He squinted through his cockpit glass. The sky looked empty. Too empty. That was when everything changed. The first sign something was wrong came from the radio. The ground controller's voice sounded confused. "Wait, I am seeing something strange. The radar shows..." "No, that cannot be right." Klaus felt his stomach tighten. In flying, strange usually meant dangerous. Then Otto screamed. Klaus turned his head just in time to see his wingman's plane explode in a ball of orange fire. Pieces of metal flew past his cockpit. There was no warning, no time to react. Otto was just gone. Klaus spun his plane around, looking for the attacker. Nothing. The sky was still empty. How could Otto be dead if there was no enemy? "Ghost 1, this is ground control. We show no enemy fighters in your area. Repeat, no enemy fighters." But Klaus knew what he had seen. Someone had killed Otto, someone invisible. More radio calls filled his headphones. Other German pilots were screaming about attacks from nowhere. Planes were dying all around him. But the radar showed nothing. It was impossible. Klaus pushed his plane into a steep dive, trying to escape whatever was killing his friends. The ground rushed toward him. Trees and fields grew larger. His engine whined as he flew faster than he had ever flown before. That was when he saw them. Far below, skimming just above the treetops, were shapes that made his blood freeze. American fighters. P-51 Mustangs. But they were flying so low that they looked like they were touching the ground. No wonder the radar could not see them. Klaus had never seen anything like it. These American pilots were flying their planes like they were driving cars on a road, perfectly smooth, perfectly controlled. They moved between the hills like water flowing around rocks. One of the Mustangs pulled up toward Klaus. Its guns started firing. Bright flashes lit up its nose. Klaus yanked his control stick hard to the right. His plane rolled sideways. Bullets cracked past his cockpit. The American pilot was good. Very good. Better than Klaus had expected. The Nazi teachers had said American pilots were poorly trained. They said Americans only won because they had more planes. But this pilot flew like he had been born in the cockpit. Klaus tried to turn inside the American's turn. It was a move that should have worked. His Bf-109 was supposed to turn tighter than any American fighter, but the Mustang stayed with him. Its guns kept firing. More bullets hit Klaus's plane. His engine started making a sick coughing sound. White smoke poured from under his engine cover, the cockpit filled with the smell of burning oil. Klaus knew he was beaten. His plane was dying. The American had outflown him completely. Everything he had been taught about German superiority was wrong. These Americans were not soft. They were not cowards. They were deadly. His plane shuddered and started to fall. The ground came up fast. Klaus fought the controls, trying to find a place to land. His hands shook on the stick. The engine stopped completely. What had just happened? How had these American fighters appeared from nowhere? How had they destroyed his entire squadron without the radar seeing them? Klaus's world was crashing down around him, just like his burning plane. Klaus woke up in a white room that smelled like soap and medicine. His head hurt badly. His left arm was wrapped in clean bandages. For a moment, he could not remember where he was. Then it all came back. The invisible American fighters, his plane falling from the sky, the crash. He tried to sit up, but gentle hands pushed him back down. A man in a white coat was looking at him with kind eyes. The man spoke English, but Klaus understood some of it. The man was asking if Klaus felt pain anywhere. This confused Klaus greatly. Nazi officers had told him that Americans tortured German prisoners. They said Americans pulled out fingernails and cut off fingers. They said American doctors let German soldiers die without helping them. But this American doctor was checking his wounds very carefully. The man gave Klaus water to drink and pills for the pain. 2 days later, Klaus was strong enough to walk. American soldiers took him to a train. Klaus expected to be put in a cattle car like the Jews he had seen being moved through his town. Instead, the Americans gave him a seat by a window. They brought him food, real food, bread with butter, soup with meat, coffee that tasted better than anything he had drunk in 2 years. Klaus stared out the train window as it rolled through England. Even though the country was at war, he saw things that made no sense. Trucks filled with food drove down every road. People in the towns looked healthy and strong. Children played in the streets instead of hiding from bombs. How could the enemy country look so much better than Germany? The train took Klaus to a ship. The ship was bigger than any building in his hometown. American sailors gave him a warm coat and showed him to a small room with 2 beds. Klaus had expected to sleep on the floor like an animal. Instead, he got his own pillow and 3 blankets. During the long trip across the ocean, Klaus ate 3 times every day. The American food was better than what German officers ate. There was always enough. Sometimes Klaus could not finish everything on his plate. This seemed impossible. In Germany, his mother saved potato peels to make soup. Here, American sailors threw away half-eaten sandwiches like they were nothing. The ship arrived in America on a sunny morning in January. Klaus had never seen a harbor so big. Hundreds of ships filled the water. Cranes lifted huge boxes from the ships like they weighed nothing. Trucks drove everywhere, carrying more supplies than Klaus had ever seen in one place. Americans took Klaus to a camp in Alabama. He had expected prison bars and guard towers with machine guns. The camp did have fences, but they looked more like the fence around a farm. The buildings were clean and painted white. There was a baseball field where prisoners played games in the afternoon. Klaus met other German prisoners in the camp. Many of them looked confused, just like him. A man named Friedrich had been captured in France. Friedrich told Klaus about the American factories he had seen. They made tanks 24 hours every day. Workers had so many tools that they never had to wait for anything. The factories were bigger than entire German towns. An American officer came to talk to Klaus about the day he was shot down. The officer spoke perfect German. Klaus asked him about the invisible fighters. The officer smiled and sat down across from Klaus at a wooden table. The American explained that the P-51 Mustangs were not really invisible. They had flown very low to stay under the German radar. American pilots trained for months to fly just above the treetops. They used maps that showed every hill and valley. They talked to each other with special radios that German equipment could not hear. They planned every attack like a chess game. Klaus felt sick as he listened. German pilots got maybe 20 hours of training before they had to fight. American pilots got over 200 hours. German planes had almost no fuel for training flights. American pilots practiced flying low every single day until they could do it perfectly. The American officer showed Klaus pictures of P-51 factories. Thousands of workers built the fighters on assembly lines that moved like rivers. One factory could make more planes in a month than all of Germany could make in 6 months. Klaus stared at the pictures and could not speak. Every day brought new shocks. The camp had a library with thousands of books. Prisoners could read anything they wanted. There was a workshop where Germans could learn to fix radios and engines. American teachers came to help prisoners who wanted to learn English. Klaus started working in the camp kitchen. American cooks showed him how to prepare meals for 800 prisoners. They used more meat in one day than his family had eaten in the entire year before the war. The American cooks threw away vegetables that had tiny brown spots. In Germany, Klaus's mother would have been happy to find vegetables that good. A truck came to the camp every week with bottles of Coca-Cola for the American guards. Sometimes the guards shared the sweet drinks with prisoners who worked hard. Klaus had heard of Coca-Cola, but never tasted it. The fizzy drink was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was sweet and cold and perfect. How could a country make something so wonderful and give it to everyone? At night, Klaus lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling. Everything he had been taught was wrong. America was not weak. Americans were not stupid. Their pilots were not cowards. They had beaten him and his friends not because they got lucky, but because they were better. They had better planes, better training, better food, and better tools. Klaus began to wonder what else the Nazi teachers had lied about. December the 24th, 1944. Klaus sat in the camp dining hall watching American guards decorate a Christmas tree. The smell of roasting turkey filled the air from the kitchen. He had not expected anything special today. German prisoners did not get holidays. At least, that was what he thought. But the Americans were doing something strange. They hung lights on the tree. They put up red and green decorations around the dining room. Some of the guards were humming Christmas songs. Klaus felt confused and sad. This would be his first Christmas away from home. At 6 o'clock, American officers called all the prisoners to dinner. Klaus walked into the dining hall and stopped. His mouth fell open. The tables were covered with white cloths. Each place had real plates and metal forks. In the center of every table sat a roasted turkey, golden brown and steaming. Around the turkeys were bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, and warm bread rolls. Klaus had not seen this much food in one place since before the war started. His stomach made hungry noises just looking at it all. The American camp commander, Colonel Harrison, stood up to speak. He wished all the prisoners a Merry Christmas. He said that even though they were enemies, this was a time for peace and kindness. Klaus sat down at a table with 5 other German prisoners. None of them spoke for several minutes. They just stared at the food. Finally, an older prisoner named Hans started to cry. He said the meal reminded him of Christmas dinners from when he was a boy, before everything went wrong. Klaus cut into his piece of turkey. The meat was tender and juicy. He ate slowly, trying to make it last. The mashed potatoes were creamy and smooth. The cranberry sauce was sweet and tart at the same time. He had forgotten that food could taste this good. After dinner, an American guard brought Klaus a package. It had Klaus's name written on it in his mother's handwriting. Klaus's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a letter and a small wooden cross that his father had carved. The letter was dated 2 months ago. His mother wrote that she was proud of him for fighting for Germany. She said she hoped he was safe and would come home soon. She told him that food was very hard to find. They were eating soup made from potato peels and old bread. His little sister had lost so much weight that her clothes did not fit anymore. Klaus held the letter and felt his world break apart. Here he was, eating the best meal he had had in years, while his family was starving. The Americans were feeding him better as their prisoner than his own country had fed him as their soldier. The next morning, Klaus could not stop thinking about the Christmas dinner. He walked to the camp library and found books about America. He wanted to understand how a country could have so much food and so many good things. What he read made his head spin. America had farms that were bigger than entire German states. They had machines that could harvest wheat faster than 100 men working by hand. Their factories could make cars and planes and weapons all at the same time. They had so much steel and oil and rubber that they could supply their own army and give supplies to Britain and Russia too. Klaus read about American schools. Every child got to go to school for free until they were 18 years old. They learned science and math and history. They were taught to ask questions and think for themselves. In Germany, Klaus had left school when he was 14 to work in his father's factory. An American teacher named Mr. Johnson started coming to the camp twice a week. He taught English classes for prisoners who wanted to learn. Klaus signed up right away. Mr. Johnson was patient and kind. He answered every question, even when Klaus asked about things that made America look good and Germany look bad. One day, Klaus asked Mr. Johnson about the Negro soldiers he had seen at the camp. Nazi teachers had said that black people were not as smart as white people, but Klaus saw Negro American soldiers who could read and write and fix complicated machines. Mr. Johnson explained that the Nazis had lied about many things, including about different races of people. Klaus started writing in a small notebook that Mr. Johnson had given him. He wrote down his thoughts and feelings about what he was learning. One night, he wrote these words: "I came to this war thinking German people were the best in the world. I thought our machines were perfect and our leaders were wise. I thought Americans were weak and stupid. But I see now that I was the one who was stupid. The Americans beat us not because they got lucky, but because they are better at almost everything." Klaus thought about the P-51 Mustangs that had shot him down. Those planes had not appeared from nowhere like magic. They were the result of American engineers who knew more about flying than German engineers. American factories that could build thousands of perfect planes. American pilots who trained until they could fly like birds. American leaders who planned every attack like a smart game of chess. Everything Klaus had believed about his country and his enemies was wrong. Germany was not strong. It was weak and getting weaker every day. America was not a nation of soft, lazy people. It was a nation of smart, hard-working people who had built something amazing. Klaus closed his notebook and looked out his window at the American flag flying over the camp. For the first time since he was shot down, he felt something strange. He felt grateful. Grateful that the Americans had captured him instead of killing him. Grateful that they had shown him the truth instead of letting him die for lies. June 8th, 1947. Klaus stepped off the train in Munich and could not believe what he saw. His beautiful city looked like a broken toy. Piles of broken stone and twisted metal filled the streets where buildings used to stand. Weeds grew through cracks in the roads. The smell of dust and death still hung in the air after 2 years of peace. Klaus carried a small canvas bag with everything he owned. Inside was the notebook where he had written his thoughts in the prison camp. There was also a set of small American tools that Colonel Harrison had given him when he left Alabama. The tools were made of steel that was better than anything Klaus had seen in Germany. Each tool fit perfectly in his hand and would last for many years. The train station was full of people who looked like walking skeletons. Their clothes hung loose on thin bodies. Their eyes were hollow and sad. Klaus realized he looked different from them. 3 years of American food had made him strong and healthy. His face was full and his skin had color. He felt ashamed to look so good when everyone else looked so bad. Klaus walked through the streets toward his family's house. Every block showed more destruction. Stores that had sold food and clothes were now piles of rubble. The school where Klaus had learned to read was gone. Only part of one wall was still standing, with broken windows that looked like dead eyes. When Klaus reached his street, his heart sank. His family's house was half destroyed. The roof was gone, and one wall had fallen down. But smoke was coming from a small chimney in the back. Someone was still living there. Klaus pushed open the broken front door. His mother was sitting at a wooden table, trying to sew patches on old clothes. She looked up and screamed. For a moment, she did not recognize her own son. Klaus had grown taller and stronger. His face was no longer the thin, worried face of a boy going to war. His mother threw her arms around him and cried. She felt so small and light that Klaus was afraid he might hurt her if he hugged too hard. She had lost so much weight that she felt like a bird in his arms. Her hair was gray now, though she was only 45 years old. Klaus's father came up from the basement, where they had been living since their house was bombed. He looked older than Klaus remembered. His hands were cut and scarred from digging through rubble to find things to sell or trade for food. When he saw Klaus, he started to cry too. The family sat together in their broken kitchen and talked for hours. Klaus's parents told him about the last months of the war. They had eaten grass soup and boiled leather to stay alive. Klaus's little sister had died from sickness during the winter of 1945. They had not been able to get medicine to save her. Klaus wanted to tell them about America, but he did not know how to start. How could he explain that he had been treated better as a prisoner than they had been treated as citizens? How could he describe Christmas dinner with turkey and cranberry sauce to people who had eaten tree bark to survive? That night, Klaus gave his mother the small bag of coffee that Colonel Harrison had let him take from the prison camp. His mother held the coffee beans like they were gold. She had not tasted real coffee in 3 years. When she made a pot the next morning, the smell filled their broken house and made it feel like home again. Klaus started working right away. He used his American tools to help neighbors fix their houses and shops. The tools were so much better than anything available in Germany that other workers stopped to watch Klaus use them. Word spread quickly that Klaus Weber had American tools and knew how to use them well. Within a month, Klaus had more work than he could handle. He fixed roofs and windows and doors. He taught other men how to use the American methods he had learned in prison camp. The American way of working was faster and better than the old German ways. Jobs that used to take 3 days could be finished in 1 day. Klaus started a small school in the evenings. He taught young men how to read blueprints and measure wood correctly. He showed them how American workers organized their tools and planned their projects. Most importantly, he taught them to think for themselves instead of just following orders. Many people asked Klaus about his time in America. At first, he was afraid to tell the truth, but slowly he began to share what he had learned. He told them that Americans were not monsters, but normal people who worked hard and treated each other fairly. He explained that America was strong because it let people learn and grow and ask questions. One evening, Klaus sat in his small room writing in his notebook. He thought about the P-51 Mustangs that had shot him down. Those invisible fighters had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. He wrote these words, "I went to war believing we were the master race. I was shot down by ghosts that I could not see or understand. In prison, I learned that the ghosts were not magic. They were knowledge and hard work and treating people with respect." Klaus looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere across the ocean, Colonel Harrison and Mr. Johnson and all the American guards who had been kind to him were living their lives. They had taught Klaus that strength did not come from hating other people. Real strength came from building things and learning new ideas and helping your neighbors. Klaus picked up his American tools and held them in his hands. Tomorrow, he would teach more young Germans how to build instead of destroy. That was his gift to the country that had lost its way. That was how he would honor what he had learned from the invisible fighters who had saved his life by shooting him down.